Welcome to the TDS Early Years podcast. Now, each week we're going to be joined by different educational experts from across the globe who are going to offer exclusive insights, inspiration and guidance to help us as practitioners unlock all the potential for learning that there is in the early years. So to be first to hear about future episodes and to access all of the follow-up content, including ideas for your own setting, Pinterest, mood boards, and loads more, you can sign up for exclusive access using the link in our podcast description. Hello, my name is Alistair Bryce-Clegg, and I am the host for this week's TDS Talking Early Years podcast, and I'm an early years consultant, author, and trainer. So in this first series of the TDS Talking Early Years podcast, we're exploring those amazing adventures of outdoor learning in the early years. And I'm going to be talking to a number of global experts to inspire your everyday practice and unlock some of the potential for outdoor play with early years children. And I'm delighted today to introduce my guest, Sue Asquith, who is an award-winning international early childhood consultant. Good morning, Sue.
Good morning, Alistair. How are you?
I am good. How are you?
I'm good, thank you. Good.
Really thrilled to have you on the podcast. But for anybody that hasn't come across you or your work, could you just give us a brief introduction into who is Sue Asquith and what do you do?
Okay, absolutely. So my name's Sue, as you said. I'm an early childhood consultant working internationally and also throughout the UK. I suppose in terms of outdoor play, my kind of early experiences are as a Girl Guide, a Queen's Guide, and I was a guide leader and also a venture scout. So got kind of lots of outdoor pursuits there. So even though I didn't do any specific forest school training or nature kindergarten or anything like that, lots of kind of knowledge to bring with me and training in terms of that and inspiring the outdoors. I used to be a childminder and we had a garden here at home where we did a lot of outdoor pursuits with children, but also really lucky to live across the road from a country park where we could really explore lots and lots of different things there as well. So yeah, lots of different things happening. I'm an author of a book called Self-Regulation Schools and Young Children, and I do consultancy visits to help people prepare for Ofsted inspections and also deliver lots of training online and face-to-face. So loads of things, which obviously is really inspiring to be able to see everybody's practice as well.
And today, Sue and I are going to be chatting a little bit more about how we can create environments that really enable children to engage in outdoor play, but also explore a little bit the idea of what is continuous provision in the outdoors. What does that mean and how does it impact on children? So for you, Sue, if you had to give, and I know it's a difficult question, but if you had to give a definition to what is continuous provision in the outdoors, what sort of things should practitioners be looking at?
When I think of continuous provision, I think about the learning opportunities that might be there for children in an open-ended way. I don't think about us setting activities up here and tough spots there and these things here and there. I just think I know we're going to be there as adults to support children and obviously supervise them and what have you, but if you weren't there, does what you have out inspire them to learn? What are the learning possibilities that children might get from there? And it might not be every child because you'll know their schema, their learning style, their common play types and things. You'll know what they want and what you need from them, hopefully, what they need from you, even hopefully. But really thinking about what is it here? Does it look inspirational? Because if it doesn't look inspirational to you, then the children won't find it inspirational either. What is that awe and wonder and excitement that's going on? So possibly thinking about the areas of learning, and obviously it would depend on whether we're thinking about a baby area here, toddler area, shared area, or maybe a preschool environment. But what are the possibilities within all those learning and areas of learning, and how does that support children's learning? And we need to think about how well resourced that is, not just about kind of once a year or once every season, but like every day. Where are the chalks? Has somebody hidden them? Have they run out? What's going on? Where's that mud in the mud kitchen, etc., etc. You know, it needs that kind of careful thought, just like inside does as well. So I think that's where I'd go with continuous provision.
Yeah, I think often when I talk to practitioners about it, we talk about the fact that if you weren't there, could the children access this space? So if it's an activity or something that you've set up that needs an adult to make it work, so if it is about can you count the conkers or can you reorganize the numbers on the number line, whatever it may be, that's not really continuing provision. It's about saying, here's an objective, can you achieve it? And so continuous provision for me also, like you've just said, can be a lot more ambiguous. So again, if we look at the resourcing of that, you can have loads more open-ended resources linked to whatever you're investigating, whether it be sand play or water play, whatever it may be. the children can then interpret in different ways. And it also gives the adult lots of opportunities to do exactly what you're saying, which is to watch, but then also sometimes to scaffold, sometimes to teach. So sometimes saying, that's really interesting. Have you seen this? Or I wonder what would happen if we did this. Or so there are opportunities not just to say, you should be doing this now, but to offer up various opportunities for children to engage, some of which they will take and some of which they won't. But that's the joy of the job that we do.
Mm-hmm, absolutely. One of the things that I quite like to do is I've noticed, or have you seen, and just kind of, if they've not seen something, you kind of almost drawing their attention to something, but still not being that kind of person that said, let's go look at this, kind of just to see what happens there. And then maybe they'll take you up on that, or I've heard, or whatever. And then maybe they take you up on that and maybe they don't. But I think it's about those planned and unplanned moments. Children bring you loads of unplanned moments, but also the environment does as well. So you might suddenly hear a helicopter or an aeroplane or one of the emergency services going past. And it's just, picking up on all those teachable moments that are unplanned maybe as well. And I know a lot of Ofsted reports say things about missed teachable moments, but I see a lot of people missing teachable moments. Maybe because they are involved with another child, but, having those ears open all the time and trying to be responsive to what's going on as well.
And it is quite a brave thing to do in your practice, just to say, well, I'm going to drop what I was going to do, because as human beings, your thought process is going somewhere and you think, right, I can see, and then suddenly something happens. And to be able to just literally turn and say, right, never mind that, let's go with that. But I think once you get into that mindset, it becomes more like second nature. But we've talked a lot about developing the team over these podcasts that we've done. And I think, again, we come back to that. These things don't happen overnight, and these things can't just happen if one person wants to do it. If you've got a team, and it can be a quick journey or a very slow journey, but it's about trying to develop the team and say, we do this because it has maximum potential impact on children's well-being, learning and development. I don't do this just because I like walking up mountains on a Sunday and it's my personal preference. We do this because it impacts on children. And therefore, and you were right, I think you said in the very first podcast, you will have different members of staff with different preferences, and that's great. And somebody who loves to be outdoors all the time will relish that opportunity. But everybody in the team needs to appreciate the importance of why we do it, which might just stop people from feeling really miserable in an outdoor space, trying to get the children back in. But the other element of that is something that you and I do a lot, which is that training for teams around, so what can you do when you're standing outdoors? What does effective outdoor play look like? Because it feels different to when you're standing indoors in the construction or in the malleable materials area. And it's all a little bit more narrow and it's all a little bit more obvious. When you're standing outside and children are running around and climbing and transporting and finding and sorting, it's sometimes hard to see where is the learning in that, and that can take time to develop. But once you get it, it just opens up a whole range of possible experiences.
It does, yeah. I think it's important also to stop and think about cultural capital, which obviously I've started to look at a lot just lately. They probably always have done, but we've got that name from it now, haven't we, over the last couple of years. But thinking about some of the children who don't come with those first-hand experiences of outdoor learning, and sometimes the parents that don't have that as well. So just and practitioners. I would be able to tell the children about the huge sycamore leaf, for example, and the small oak leaf and things like that. But some of the practitioners won't have that knowledge. Do they need that knowledge? Do we need to break things down for them so that they can be that noticing person to teach the children about what's going on? Because there's no shame in it, is there? If you were brought up in the city without any kind of, trees and lots of things around you, you're not going to know those things. If the settings are near the seaside, then obviously they will have different culture capital and different things to bring to the setting at that stage as well. So I think it's important for them to think about where they're located and the culture capital and the experiences that the children have got and the kind of things they can do with that cohort of children to be able to expand those out as well.
It's a really important point, and I think that one thing I have seen is your settings who produce kind of cultural capital checklists, so things to do before you're 2, things to do before you're 3. And I think what we've got to be really careful with, which is probably a whole podcast on its own, is the idea that we all have cultural capital. We're just talking about different sorts of cultural capital. So I might come from another country, I might not speak this language, I might have grown up in a completely other culture with other traditions, but it doesn't mean to say I've got no cultural capital. I've just got different cultural experience from things like the sycamore leaf and the oak leaf. So again, as practitioners, it's about respecting the cultural capital that everyone brings, but also acknowledging, right, if we are going to go and explore autumn with people who've not had that experience of exploring autumn, regardless of where they grew up or what their culture is, then we do need to take it back to basics and all explore together. And that's going to be really good fun, rather than making people feel like they're in a deficit of capital. It's just about, right, I know this, you know that. Let's share that knowledge and see where we go.
Yeah. And different people can bring those strengths as well, because I would maybe home in on the things that I knew about, but somebody else might kind of, something that I've not really thought about as well. And then they might kind of see different teachable moments in different things. So I think there is a huge strength in that as well.
And we talked previously about things like texture kitchens and how frustrating they can be, as well as how useful they can be. I think also when we're thinking about planning an outdoor space and thinking about those resources and thinking about things like sand and water, which are a classic to have in your, ideally for me, both in your indoor and outdoor space. And I think sometimes people say, well, it's a bit messy, or you can't have sand and water because then children put sand in the water and water in the sand, which is a massive learning opportunity, but there we go. So often settings will say, oh, my sand is in, but my water's out, or vice versa. And again, if we talk about ideals, and it depends whether they're talking about babies all the way through, but the ideal would be that you would have a sand and water experience indoors, because children are going to benefit greatly from that, which tends to be a little bit more tabletop. It's a little bit more fine motor. It tends to be a little bit smaller because of spaces and sand trays. But ideally, you want to build on that and say, well, my sand experience outdoors, and it doesn't just have to be sand. We could kind of broaden that texture out, and we could make it gravel, or we could make it pebbles, or we could make it compost, whatever it want to be. But I'm giving children a different experience of that, which is sometimes bigger, or it's sometimes how the resource is stored, or the containers it's in, or how you can move it. So even simple things like having either access to a tap on the outside or a clean water butt, but it's not near your water resources. So this, well, in one nursery many moons ago, where when I arrived, I realized their water source was at the opposite side of their outdoor space to where their water resources were. And I said, why isn't your water play next to the water? They said, because part of our children's journey is they're very motivated by playing with water on a large scale. And so we have to make them think about, how do I get this jug or this pot or this bowl of water from there over to here? And the learning in that is massive. So they very deliberately built in things that were not obstacles, but things that made their children think, enhanced that continuous provision, because they knew the motivation to play with water was great. Had they just put out a water tray with some boats in it, then the children would have got some learning from that, but it wouldn't have been necessarily any better or greater than the learning they would have got from an indoor water play opportunity.
Yeah. And I think when we started this conversation about what is continuous provision outside, we probably would maybe at times inside maybe create those kind of role play experiences maybe, but there's loads we can do with that outside as well. And I feel that's an area sometimes people do well, but sometimes often overlooked. So could you do a car wash or a garden centre or whatever in terms of obviously knowing what the children's first-hand experiences are maybe, and maybe having to give them that first-hand experience first. But there's loads of things that we can do maybe outside as well to try and to just enhance those different skills and maybe recreate those first-hand experiences, even if it's a McDonald's drive-through, or whatever they've done at home, whatever the kind of things happen, there's loads of things we can do maybe with those kind of given opportunities to role play their first-hand experiences outside as well.
And one interesting thought I had when I was working with a setting that had looked at the language of the space that they used and how important language was for children. And again, it was going back to Mud Kitchen. So they'd started off with a Mud Kitchen, and then they'd called it a texture kitchen in its kind of next metamorphosis, because they felt that when they talked about mud, all the children did was make mud pies. And so they did a lot of domestic role play as they were doing inside in the home corner, and they felt the play was getting quite stagnant. When they called it a texture kitchen, for the staff and the children, they then started to bring other things in, like gravel and conkers and all sorts of bits and pieces. And then in kind of its third iteration, they called it an investigation station, because what they found was, because they used the term kitchen, when you say kitchen to a child, their head immediately goes to whatever their domestic setup is around kitchen. So you are leading their play just by the title of the space. So when they called it an investigation station, It became about investigating, but also it had nothing to do with kitchens.
Yeah.
And they did that primarily for the children, but then they found that the staff started to think about the space really differently. Like, what can we investigate this week, as opposed to let's put some more pots and pans in the mud kitchen. So it depends what your children need in terms of their development around play and dramatic development. But sometimes just calling your outdoor space something different changes your expectation.
Yeah, it's a really good point. I think a lot of us will remember doing things like making the rose petal perfume and things when we were little, and maybe the kind of little thing like potions you could make on holiday with a bit of sun lotion, a bit of pool water, a bit of sand, and a bit of this and a bit of that. And we used to go around doing all those things. So I think the investigation station would maybe create all those possibilities maybe as well for children to do things like that, rather than you feel like you say that it's got to be a cafe or a kitchen just by its name, and you kind of leading them down that kind of path at you in that closed play as well.
I mean, one thing we haven't touched on, because there's so much we could touch on, is that kind of gender stereotyping that happens in early year spaces, even for adults that are really trying hard to stop that from happening. And the children are, from about 2, the research tells us, are very aware of their own gender, so become quite gendered in their play. And when things are often home corners or cafes or things that, because of our gendered society, are often associated with one particular gender, they can narrow that play a bit. And that's why the role of the adult is really important, to try and break down those stereotypes. So trying to keep things as open-ended and ambiguous as we possibly can, while still giving children a frame of reference. Because sometimes if you make it too ambiguous and they haven't got that experience, children will struggle to know what to do and how to do it. But then if you make it too closed, you can often close down their learning opportunities because they don't know what happens in that space, or they haven't had that experience. So it's finding that nice balance between some real hooks that adults can create and deliver, and lots of opportunity for interpretation. And then you get, as an adult, to stand back and watch and see what's working and what's not, and kind of tweak as you go.
Yeah, I'm pleased you speak about hooks. I feel so I go like this all the time. And when you hook children, but it's knowing those children, isn't it? And again, it's knowing a little bit about the first-hand experiences they might have had before, what has interested them before, their learning play types, and it's about using those various skills. I often think about our skills as being a toolbox, and using various different tools for different strategies for different people. And obviously we just need to make sure that we are filling our toolboxes with as much training and podcasts and CPD and things as possible, so that we've got those strategies to apply to try and make our teaching as effective as possible for each individual child, regardless of their background, their experience so far, and what they like and don't like. So we've got loads of things that we can do to help children on their journeys as well.
And I think you're dead right. I think for me, there are primarily 2 sorts of hooks that you can have. One is the hook that you do because you're an adult, and you would literally, it's the, that kind of, look at what I've got, or have you seen this, or I'm going to introduce this to you, or that's a very adult prompted, I'm going to give you this. And the other hook, which is usually way more impactful but more subtle, is that exactly thing that you said, your knowledge of the children, where you're thinking, right, I know you're going to love this, but that's not your bag. So therefore, I can't have a blanket approach that we're all going to do this. So what I need to do is learn about you over time. And then I'm constantly engaging you with things that I know that you're going to enjoy, and then enhancing the provision with things that I know that you're going to like, because that gets your high level of engagement, which lifts your well-being, which gives me massive opportunity to be able to deliver the teaching.
Yeah,
that's the constant dance that we do as early years educators, and sometimes we get it right and sometimes we get it wrong, but there's a lot of fun for us in doing that and exploring that.
And also about sequencing and progression, that is it. Because if you do something, you notice somebody really likes it, and you do it and do it and do it, and they're just going to get really bored with it. Then it might have looked really good to begin with, but then it gets really stale. So then, that's good. Has it had its day? Do we need to move it on? Or they're still liking that, but can I add a different concept onto there? And can I, extend that knowledge even more and dig deeper into that interest in that learning as well? And always be on your feet with that, isn't it? It's always thinking outside the box with those things.
And, fundamentally, We are all unique as adults. I know we say this a lot in early years, but it's good to remind ourselves of it. And children are fundamentally unique beings. And so as a unique being, you're not going to have one preference that carries on forever and ever and ever. Your preferences will change over time due to what you know, experiences you have, interactions. So our role is just to try as best as we can and maintain that uniqueness for all children by creating an outdoor and indoor space that allows them to be unique. So the more narrow our space becomes, the more limited the opportunities, the less unique you can be, the more open-ended and flexible the space becomes, the more opportunities for uniqueness.
Absolutely. And dipping back into kind of cultural capital and that kind of risky play, kind of stuff like that. We know sometimes we talk about risky play, but we expect it to be risky, as in climbing and doing this and running fastest and jumping highest and things like that. But we forget about that emotional side of risky play. That might be if a child's found a worm or you're going on a bug hunt or something. That's a huge risk for some children to be able to engage with that, look at it, touch it and what have you. They might just want to step back and go, what you're doing. But just kind of, again, knowing those children really and knowing how we can enhance their learning as well and support them.
Which is a brilliant place to end this episode, because in our next episode, Sue and I are going to dip into the role of the adult in the outdoor space and see what we can talk about in that, but also why and how outdoor spaces are really impactful for learning. So don't forget to tune into that one. But for today, thanks again, Sue. That was brilliant.
Thank you, Alistair.
I'd like to say a huge thank you to my guest Sue for joining us and providing such valuable insights into outdoor play. So you've been listening to the TTS Talking Early Years podcast with me, Alistair Bryce-Clegg, and with Sue Asquith. If you've been inspired by our conversation today, don't forget you can sign up via the link in our episode notes and be the first to hear about future episodes and access exclusive follow-up content, which include things like ideas for your setting and Pinterest boards that will help you shop for everything outdoors.